Welcome back to Chronicles of Valor, the channel where the echoes of history's most harrowing conflicts are brought to life. I'm your host, and tonight, we're stepping into the boots of a soldier who faced impossible odds, a man who stared down one of the most feared war machines ever created and dared to believe he could win. This isn't just a story about tactics or firepower. It's a testament to the sheer, unyielding power of the human spirit when everything is on the line. It's about the moment when doubt turns into determination, and a single calculated risk can alter the course of a battle, a life, and the memory of all who witnessed it. We've all heard tales of legendary tanks, of the steel beasts that dominated the battlefields of the Second World War. The German Tiger was more than just a tank. It was a symbol of invincibility, a 57-ton predator that struck fear into the hearts of Allied soldiers. Its armor was thick, its cannon was devastating, and taking one down was considered a near-suicidal task. But for one young tanker, faced with the mockery of his own crew, the growl of the Tiger's engine wasn't a death knell, it was a challenge. He made a claim that sounded like a boast, a fool's dream, but what happened next would forge a legend. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you believe these tales of courage and sacrifice deserve to be remembered, I need you to do 3 things for me. First, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It's the single best way to support the channel and ensure you never miss these critical stories. Second, give this video a like. It tells the algorithm that this history matters. And finally, drop a comment down below letting us know what country and what city you're watching from. It's incredible to see our community of history enthusiasts stretching across the entire globe. Now lock and load. Let's get into it. A slow, tense, orchestral track begins to fade in. The laughter was the worst part. It wasn't loud or boisterous, not the kind of hearty guffaw you'd share over a bottle of stolen wine. It was a quiet, sharp, and dismissive sound like grinding stones, and it echoed in the cramped, sweat-slicked confines of our M4 Sherman louder than any artillery shell ever could. It came from all 3 of them. From Miller, our grizzled gunner who'd seen the sands of Africa and the hedgerows of Normandy. From Peterson, the fresh-faced loader, barely 19 and still trying to grow a proper mustache. And even from Davies, our driver, a man so stoic he barely spoke a full sentence, but whose snort of derision was as clear as a church bell. I was the commander, the one they were supposed to look to, the one with the bars on my collar and the weight of their lives on my shoulders. But in that moment, I was just the fool who had opened his mouth and said the impossible. "I can take it down," I had said, my voice barely a whisper into the intercom, my eyes glued to the binoculars pressed so hard against my face they were leaving deep, red rings around my sockets. Out there, across the churned-up mud of the French countryside, partially obscured by a copse of skeletal November trees, sat the reason for their scorn. It was a Tiger, not just any tank, but the tank, Panzerkampfwagen 6, the steel behemoth that had haunted our waking moments and stalked our nightmares since we landed on Utah Beach. We had seen what they could do. We had driven past the smoldering hulks of our own Shermans, their hulls punched through by the Tiger's infamous 88mm cannon, as if they were made of cheap tin. We'd seen the crews, or what was left of them, and the memory was a coppery taste of fear that never quite left your mouth. Our platoon had been advancing cautiously through what the maps called the Perroy Forest, a deceptively peaceful name for a place that had become a muddy, splintered hell. We were part of the 4th Armored Division, pushing toward the German border, and the resistance was getting stiffer with every kilometer. The autumn rains had turned the landscape into a quagmire, and our Sherman, which we'd affectionately nicknamed Lucky Penny, in a fit of bitter irony, was caked in a thick layer of mud that seemed to suck the very life and speed from its tracks. We were on point, scouting ahead of the main column, when I saw it. A flicker of movement, a shape that was just too square, too brutally geometric to be part of the natural world. I'd raised my binoculars, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and there it was, broad, menacing, its long 88mm gun pointed slightly skyward like a predator sniffing the air. It was stationary, its crew likely confident in their position, waiting for unsuspecting prey, like us. Standard procedure was to report, pull back and call in air support or a coordinated attack with tank destroyers. You didn't take on a Tiger one-on-one in a Sherman. It was suicide. The Sherman was a decent tank, reliable and fast, but against a Tiger, it was a lightweight going up against a heavyweight champion. Our 75mm gun, while effective against infantry and lighter armor, had a nasty habit of bouncing shells off the Tiger's thick frontal plate. They called the Sherman a Ronson because it lit up on the first strike, a grim joke about a popular cigarette lighter. The Germans had their own nickname for it, Tommy Cooker. We were, to put it bluntly, outmatched in every conceivable way. My crew knew it. I knew it. But as I stared at that metal monster, something else was stirring in my gut, something beyond the cold dread. It was a cold, burning anger. I was tired of running. I was tired of being the prey. I was tired of seeing my friends burn. "You're crazy, Lieutenant." Miller's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp with disbelief. "Pure D crazy. That thing will tear us a new one before we even get in range. Its gun is more accurate at 2,000 yards than ours is at 500. He wasn't wrong. Miller was a pragmatist, a survivor. He had a wife and a 2-year-old daughter back in Ohio, and his only goal was to make it back to them. He saw the Tiger not as a target, but as a death sentence. Peterson, ever the echo of the older gunner, chimed in, his voice trembling slightly. "He's right, sir. We should fall back. Call it in. That's what the book says. The book." I wanted to scream. The book hadn't been written by the men who had to watch their friends die in these metal coffins. The book didn't account for the gnawing frustration, the feeling of utter helplessness as you faced an enemy who was technologically superior in almost every way. The book was written by staff officers in comfortable tents, miles behind the lines. Davies, as usual, said nothing, but I could feel the tension radiating from the driver's compartment, the way his hands would be gripping the controls, ready to throw the lucky penny into a frantic, life-saving reverse. I lowered my binoculars. The image of the Tiger seared into my retinas. It was angled slightly away from us, its massive turret pointing towards the main road we had just veered off of. They were waiting for the column, for the big fish. They hadn't seen us, a single mud-caked Sherman tucked behind a rise in the terrain and a screen of foliage. We had the element of surprise, a fleeting, precious advantage that would evaporate the second our engine roared to life, or a twig snapped under our tracks. "They're not expecting us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "They're waiting for the main force. We're in their flank. It's a side shot." The silence that followed was thick with skepticism. A side shot was better than a frontal one, sure. The Tiger's side armor was less formidable, but it was still over 80 millimeters of hardened steel. Our standard armor-piercing rounds might scratch the paint, but they weren't guaranteed to penetrate. We needed a perfect shot, at the perfect angle, hitting a perfect spot. It was a shot that required more than just skill. It required a staggering amount of luck, and our tank's name felt more like a taunt than a promise. "A side shot from this distance?" Miller's voice was laced with scorn now. "Through those trees? With this pop gun? Lieutenant, with all due respect, have you been sniffing the exhaust fumes?" The laughter followed, that quiet, gut-wrenching sound. It wasn't just disagreement, it was pity. They thought the pressure had finally cracked me. They thought their young, green-behind-the-ears commander, who'd only been leading them for 2 months since Lieutenant Roberts was killed, had finally lost his nerve and replaced it with a suicidal fantasy. In their eyes, I saw the reflection of my own doubts. Was this courage or insanity? Was I leading them to a moment of glory or to a fiery grave? The weight of command settled on me, heavier than the Tiger's armor. These men, their lives, their families waiting back home. It was all my responsibility. The safe play, the smart play, was to back away slowly, get on the radio, and let someone else handle the problem. But I couldn't shake the image of that Tiger, sitting there waiting to annihilate our friends, our brothers in arms who were advancing, blissfully unaware, into a perfectly laid trap. If we ran, the column would be hit, more Shermans would burn, more men would die. We were the only ones who could stop it right here, right now. It was a terrible, brutal calculus of war, weighing the lives of my 3 men against the dozens in the column behind us. The laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy quiet. They were waiting for my next command, probably expecting me to concede, to give the order to retreat. I took a deep breath, the air in the turret thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and fear. I looked at the worn photo of my wife, Eleanor, tucked into a corner of the periscope housing. Her smile felt like it was from another lifetime, a world away from this mud and steel and death. I wasn't a hero. I was a scared kid from Pennsylvania who had been taught to hunt deer, not panzers. But my father had taught me something else. You never, ever let the buck get away if it meant your family would go hungry. And right now, that Tiger was the predator, and my entire adopted military family was about to walk into its jaws. "Davies," I said, my voice now hard, devoid of the earlier hesitation. "When I give the word, I want you to creep forward, slowly, no sudden moves. Hug the tree line. Get us 50 yards closer." There was a pause. I could almost hear Davies's frown. "Miller, load AP. Peterson, Have another one ready the second the first is out. I want you to be a machine. I raised the binoculars again, my knuckles white. The tiger hadn't moved. It sat there, patient, arrogant in its power. Miller, you see that spot, right below the turret ring, just above the tracks? There's a seam there. That's our target. Miller's sigh was heavy with resignation. It's a 1 in a million shot, Lieutenant. Then we'll have to be that one, won't we? I replied, my gaze fixed on the enemy. The laughter was gone now. In its place was a tense, grim silence. They still thought I was crazy, but they were soldiers, and they followed orders. The fate of our lucky penny, and perhaps the entire column, now rested on a single improbable shot, the shot that, one way or another, would change everything. Davies didn't acknowledge the order with words. He didn't need to. I felt it rather than heard it, a subtle shift in the tank's idling vibration as his hands, scarred and perpetually stained with grease, moved with a practiced delicacy on the steering levers. He eased the throttle, and the lucky penny lurched forward, not with a roar but with a groan, the sound of 30 tons of steel being coaxed into reluctant motion. The tracks bit into the sucking, sodden earth, and the sound seemed to fill the universe. To me, in the turret, it was a deafening clatter of metal on mud, a grinding, squealing symphony of betrayal. Every snap of a twig under our treads was a rifle shot, every splash of watery mud a grenade exploding. I was convinced that every German soldier within a 5-mile radius could hear us, that the Tiger's massive turret was already beginning its slow, murderous traverse in our direction. I kept my eyes fused to the binocular sight, my world reduced to a magnified circle of gray trees and the menacing silhouette of our target. The Tiger remained static, a statue of contemptuous power. It hadn't hurt us, not yet. The wind was in our favor, carrying the sound of our engine away from them back towards our own lines. Or perhaps they were simply that arrogant, that certain of their invincibility, that the sound of a single, struggling engine didn't even register as a threat. I prayed for the latter. Easy, Davies, easy. I murmured into the mic, my voice hoarse, like we're walking on eggshells. Don't let the transmission whine. Below me, I could hear his muffled curse as the tank slewed slightly to the left, a track momentarily losing purchase in a deeper patch of ooze before catching again. Each yard was a victory. Each yard was a lifetime. Inside the turret, the air was already thick and foul. It was a cocktail of unwashed bodies, cold fear sweat, the sharp tang of gun oil, and the faint, ever-present stink of diesel fumes. Peterson, our loader, was a pale ghost in the dim light. He had already retrieved an M61 armor-piercing capped shell from the ready rack. It was a heavy, wicked-looking piece of steel, and he held it with a strange reverence, as if it were a religious icon. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps, his eyes wide, fixed on the dark, oily metal of the breech. To my left, Miller was a study in grim professionalism. His laughter was long gone, replaced by a deep, furrowed scowl of concentration. He despised me in this moment. I knew it. He thought I was a fool, a green lieutenant on a glory-hunting suicide run, and he was probably right. But he was also the best damned gunner in the company. His hands, which had been so quick to express his derision, now moved with an economist's precision. He spat on the ground, a dark wad of tobacco juice, and wiped his hands on his already filthy trousers. His eye was pressed against the gunner's sight, his body tensed against the traverse and elevation controls. I see him, Lieutenant. His voice crackled, devoid of all emotion save a low, simmering anger, just sitting there, proud as a peacock. He was waiting for me to give him the range, but I held off. We needed to be closer. 50 yards. 50 yards that felt like crossing an ocean. I could feel the Lucky Penny's heart beating with my own. The thrum of the radial engine, a rhythmic mechanical pulse that was our life and, potentially, our death. I focused on the Tiger, studying it, memorizing it, trying to will a weak spot into existence. The winter light was failing, the sky a bruised purple-gray that offered little in the way of sharp contrast. The Tiger's camouflage pattern, jagged stripes of dark yellow, green, and red-brown, was hideously effective, designed to break up its massive outline in just this kind of shattered forest. But I had seen the seam. In training, back in England, they had shown us diagrams, grainy black and white photos of knocked-out tigers. They'd pointed with wooden sticks to the vulnerabilities. The Sherman 75mm, the instructor had droned, is insufficient against the Tiger's frontal armor. You must, I repeat, must seek flank or rear engagements. Aim for the engine compartment to secure a mobility kill. Aim for the ammunition stowage located here. He'd tapped the diagram right on the side of the hull just below the turret. For a catastrophic kill. A catastrophic kill. a nice, clean, clinical term for turning a 57-ton tank and its 5-man crew into a raging inferno of shrapnel and incinerated human beings. My mind kept flashing to that diagram. The seam I'd pointed out to Miller wasn't just a seam. It was the joint where the massive overhanging turret, with its 100mm thick mantlet, met the hull. It was a complex piece of engineering, a massive bearing ring, and while it was protected, it was, by necessity, a moving part. It wasn't as thick as the solid frontal plate. A direct hit there, maybe it wouldn't penetrate, but maybe it would jam the traverse, freezing the Tiger's gun. Or maybe, just maybe, the sheer kinetic force of our AP shell, traveling at over 2,000 feet per second, would shatter the bearing, or spall, sending a storm of white-hot metal fragments ricocheting around the inside of the Tiger's turret, killing or wounding the commander, gunner, and loader. It was a gamble, a desperate, filthy gamble, but it was better than trying to punch through 80mm of angled side armor, which might just deflect our shot harmlessly into the sky. 20 yards more, Davies, I whispered, my throat dry as sandpaper. The tank groaned in protest. I could hear Peterson behind me mumbling. It sounded like a prayer, the words of the Our Father lost in the metallic rumble of the tank. My own heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest. I thought of Eleanor. I thought about the letter I'd written her 2 nights ago, a letter full of lies. I told her I was safe, well behind the lines. I told her the food was good. I told her I missed her apple pie. I didn't tell her about the smell of burning flesh or the way the ground shook when the Nebelwerfer rockets came in. I didn't tell her about the look in Roberts's eyes as he bled out in my arms. I forced the thought away. Banish it. Focus. The objective. The target. The seam. Stop, I commanded. Davies brought the lucky penny to a halt with a smoothness that belied the tension. The tank settled, its engine dropping to a low, trembling idle. We were exposed. If they saw us now, we were dead. We had perhaps 30 seconds before our luck ran out. Range! Miller's voice was a sharp bark. 500 yards, I said, my eyes glued to the sight. Call it 525 to account for the angle. 525, he repeated. I heard the click-clack of him adjusting the elevation. On target. Peterson loaded? Loaded, sir. His voice was a high-pitched squeak. Miller, I said, my voice barely audible. Traverse left. Slow. I want the crosshairs. Right on the turret ring. You see the shadow line where the turret overhangs the hull? I see it, he grunted. Put the post of the reticle right on that line. Favor the rear half of the turret. That's where the ammo is. I could feel the turret shift, a tiny, precise movement as Miller worked his controls. I was now looking through my own commander's periscope, seeing the same magnified view. The Tiger filled the glass. It was terrifyingly large even at this distance. It was a castle, a fortress, and we were about to throw a rock at it. Steady, I breathed. The crosshairs in my own sight aligned perfectly with Miller's. The shot was there. It was the best shot we were ever going to get. This was it, the moment of truth. The laughter of my crew, their scorn, their fear, it all evaporated, replaced by a singular cold point of absolute focus. It was just me, my gunner, and the target. Fire, I said, my voice cracking the silence of the turret like a whip. Miller's hand, which had been resting on the firing trigger, squeezed. The world dissolved in a blinding flash and a deafening, bone-jarring roar that consumed our tiny steel world. The 75mm cannon bucked violently, and the entire Sherman rocked back on its suspension. The turret instantly filled with the acrid, choking smell of burnt cordite, a smell that would forever be linked in my mind with this single, terrifying second. The brass casing of the spent shell ejected from the breech with a loud clang, hitting the floor plates, impossibly hot. Peterson, moving on pure reflex, was already shoving the next round home, but I wasn't looking at him. I wasn't breathing. My eyes were locked on the tracer, a brilliant red line arcing across the gray landscape, flying true, straight towards the heart of the beast. Time snapped. The single second it took for our M61 shell to cross the 500 yards of scarred earth stretched into an agonizing eternity. I watched the faint, burning red line of the tracer, a fragile thread of hope, sail through the gray, misty air. It looked so small, so insignificant against the backdrop of the forest and the sheer brutal bulk of the Tiger. It seemed to slow as it approached, as if the very air around the German tank was thicker, heavier, resisting our attempt to defile its armor. My entire existence, the lives of my 3 men, the fate of the lucky penny, it all converged on that single, receding point of light. I held my breath, my knuckles so tight on the periscope handles that my bones ached. I could feel the collective frozen terror of the crew. The tank was utterly still save for the low thrum of the engine, a sound now completely eclipsed by the frantic, desperate hammering in my own chest. Then, it struck. Not with the catastrophic, turret-popping explosion I had fantasized about. Not with a satisfying bloom of fire. It was a sharp, vicious flash of brilliant yellow-white, like a massive photographer's bulb going off, right where Miller had aimed. A split second later a sound reached us, a dull, heavy metallic clang, an impact so profound that I felt the vibration through the steel hull of my own tank, a resonant, evil chime that vibrated in my teeth. "Hit!" Miller roared, his voice cracking with a mix of triumph and sheer pants-wetting terror. "It's a hit. Holy Mary, Mother of God, Peterson, load, damn you, he's gonna turn on us, he's gonna turn." Peterson, who had been frozen like a statue, his hands halfway to the next round, flinched as if he'd been slapped. He fumbled, the heavy AP shell nearly slipping from his sweaty grasp, before he recovered and rammed it into the hot, smoking britch. "Loaded!" he shrieked. Below me, Davies's voice was tight as a guitar string. "Sir? Reverse? I'm in reverse. Give me the word, sir. Let's get out of this graveyard." They were both right. Standard doctrine, what was left of it, demanded we move. You fire, you move. You especially move after you've just shot a tiger with what amounted to a glorified pea shooter. You don't wait to see if you made him mad. But I couldn't give the order. My eyes were glued to the binoculars, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The tiger just sat there. The flash of impact was gone, leaving behind a dark, ugly smudge on the side of its turret ring. But there was no smoke, no fire, no sign of a catastrophic kill. No crewmen were bailing out, their clothes ablaze. The tank was silent, unmoving, as if our shot had been nothing more than a mosquito, an annoyance to be brushed aside. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The silence from the enemy tank was louder, more terrifying, than any artillery barrage. "Well, damn it all, Lieutenant." Miller's voice dripped with a renewed, despairing sarcasm. The brief flicker of hope was extinguished, replaced by the gallows humor of men who knew they were already dead. "Looks like you knocked. I do believe you've gone and scratched his paint. Now he knows we're here." The laughter from before, the quiet, grinding stones of mockery, returned to my memory. They had laughed, and they had been right. I had gambled their lives on a 1-in-a-million shot, and it had failed. I had traded our precious anonymity, our only defense, for a single, useless gesture of defiance. And then, it moved. It wasn't the turret. It was the gun. The long, obscene barrel of the 88mm cannon, which had been angled skyward, dipped. It lowered slowly, purposefully, like a vast, reptilian predator, lowering its head to glare at the insect that had just dared to bite it. And then the turret itself, all 12 tons of it, began to turn. It moved with a slow, grinding, and inexorable smoothness, a hydraulic whisper of death. It was turning away from the main road, turning towards us, towards the patch of trees and mud that hid the Lucky Penny. He'd seen the muzzle flash. He knew exactly where we were. The sheer, cold-blooded confidence of the movement sent a spike of ice-water dread straight through my heart. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't damaged. He was simply acquiring his next target. "He sees us!" I screamed, my voice shredding my throat. The calculated calm of the commander was gone, replaced by the raw panic of the prey. "Davies! Reverse! Get us out! Get us back behind the rise! Full tilt now! Miller, smoke! Pop the launchers! Cover us!" The Lucky Penny felt like it jumped. Davies slammed the tank into reverse, and the engine roared to a deafening crescendo, the transmission whining in protest. The tank lurched backwards, its tracks spinning, desperately trying to find purchase in the thick, unforgiving mud. It was like trying to run through waist-deep water. We were moving, but it was agonizingly, fatally slow. On the turret, Miller's hand slapped the firing button for the smoke grenade launchers. With a series of dull thumps, 6 canisters popped out, arcing in front of us and exploding in plumes of thick, white, acrid smoke. For a precious second, our view of the tiger was obscured by a chemical fog, but the wind was gusting, tearing holes in our fragile screen almost as fast as it formed. "It's not thick enough," Peterson wailed, his voice cracking. "I can still see him." And then the world ripped apart. The sound was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not the boom of an explosion. It was a crack, a sharp, supersonic thunderclap that felt like it had detonated inside my own skull. It was the sound of the 88 firing. In the same instant, a massive oak tree, 30 feet to our left and at least 3 feet thick, simply vaporized. It didn't fall. It exploded into a cloud of splinters, sawdust, and white-hot shrapnel. The overpressure wave from the shell's passage and its impact hit our 30-ton Sherman like a giant's fist, violently rocking the entire vehicle. A chunk of shrapnel, probably from the tree itself, struck our turret with a deafening gong that left my ears ringing. Inside, Peterson was screaming, a high, thin animal sound of pure terror. He'd dropped the next AP round, and it was rolling dangerously around his feet on the turret floor. "Shut up, kid," Miller roared, his face pale and slick with sweat. He grabbed Peterson by the front of his uniform and shook him. "Get that damn shell. Get it loaded or we all fry." My mind was a whirlwind of pure, adrenalized panic. We were too slow. The mud was a cage. He had us ranged. That first shot was a bracketing shot. He was a professional. He knew exactly what he was doing. The next one wouldn't miss. I saw it all in a flash. The 88mm shell, white hot, punching through our laughably thin frontal armor. The jet of molten steel and spall. The flash fire of the ammunition and fuel. The screams. I'd killed them. I'd killed all of them. They laughed when I said I could take it down. The words echoed in my skull. A bitter epitaph. I'd been a fool. A proud, arrogant fool. "Davies, harder!" I yelled, though I knew he was already giving it everything. "Turn us! Get the front plate square to him! Don't let him get our side!" Even as I said it, I knew it was a useless gesture. Our frontal plate was 50mm of steel. Sloped, yes, but to an 88 at this range it was cheesecloth. We were dead. The smoke was clearing. Through the haze I saw the Tiger, sitting there, monstrous, unharmed, and its long gun was already traversing, adjusting for the next shot, and then I heard it. A second crack that split the sky. The world outside my periscope dissolved in a blinding flash of orange and black. The shell impacted the muddy rise just in front of our tank, a short shot. The explosion was immense, showering the Lucky Penny with a torrential rain of dirt, stones, and steel fragments. The noise on the hull was a deafening, rattling hailstorm, like a dozen men with sledgehammers trying to beat their way in. The tank filled with the stink of high explosives and freshly turned earth. We were still alive. My ears were ringing so badly I could barely hear, but I was alive. He was bracketing us. First shot left, second shot short, the third shot. The third shot would be the kill. He was toying with us, and then through the ringing in my ears, through the panic, a single cold thought cut through. Why was he bracketing? A gunner that good at this range, he shouldn't be missing. I jammed my eyes back to the binoculars, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them steady. I looked at the Tiger, ignoring the cannon, and focused on the turret. It was turning, but it was slow. It wasn't the smooth hydraulic menace from before. It was jerky, labored. It would move a few degrees, then pause, then move again. "Miller," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Our shot, it did something. Look, his turret traverse, it's jammed or it's damaged. He can't get his gun on us fast enough." It was a straw, a desperate, insane straw, but it was the only one we had. The laughter was gone. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but something else was pushing it aside. A wild, savage, desperate hope. "Davies, stop!" I roared. The crew recoiled. "Stop the tank! Now! Sir, no!" Miller shouted, his face ashen. "He's got us zeroed. We move or we die." "He's lost his zero," I countered, the words tumbling out of me. "He was traversing to lead us, but he's too slow. We're in a duel, damn it, and he's wounded. Stop the tank. Davies, pivot. Pivot left. Give him a harder target. Miller, loaded?" "Loaded!" Peterson yelled, his voice still a reedy shriek, but he had the shell in the breech. "Miller, you're on!" I screamed, turning my own periscope. "Same spot. Hit him again. Hit him until he burns. Fire as soon as you are on. Fire! Fire!" Davies, God bless his stoic soul, obeyed. He slammed on the brakes, and the Lucky Penny slewed to a halt in the mud. Then he hit the left tread, trying to pivot us. The tank shuddered, fighting the terrain. Miller was already on his sight, his hands flying, screaming adjustments. Traversing, on target, outside. Through the last thinning wisps of our own smoke, I saw the Tiger's cannon. It had almost completed its turn. The black hollow eye of the 88mm muzzle seemed to be staring directly into my soul. It was a race. Our loader's speed against his damaged turret ring. The shot that had failed to kill him had just signed our death warrant, or given us our only chance. It was a race measured in heartbeats, a duel fought in the agonizing slowness of heavy machinery. Outside, the world was a blurry gray hell of mud and shattered trees. Inside it was a cramped, vibrating steel-walled coffin filled with the stench of our own terror. Davies was fighting the Lucky Penny, his knuckles white on the levers, cursing a blue streak as the tank's left tread spun in the slick mud, failing to get a solid grip before finally biting. The entire hull shuddered and groaned as we began to pivot, slowly, oh God, so agonizingly slowly, turning our thickest frontal armor towards the enemy. But the Tiger was moving too. That terrible 88mm cannon, An 18-foot-long spear of high-velocity death was crawling towards us. I watched it through my periscope, the black, hollow mouth of the muzzle seeming to grow, to swell, until it filled my entire vision. It was a perfect dark circle, an eclipse of the sun, the very portal to eternity. Its jerky, damaged movement was still faster than our pivot. He would be on us before we were fully angled. He would get his shot, and he would not miss again. "He's on us! He's on us!" Peterson was screaming from the loader's station, his voice a raw, broken thing. He had braced himself against the bulkhead, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands clamped over his ears, the next AP shell forgotten at his feet. "Shut your mouth, kid," Miller spat, his eye still pressed to his own sight, his hands a blur on the traverse and elevation wheels, trying to keep his crosshairs on the Tiger's wounded turret ring, even as our own tank shuddered and yawed. "Die quiet if you're gonna die. Lieutenant, I'm losing the target. Davies, steady, steady." But there was no steady. There was only the chaos of the pivot and the oncoming, inevitable judgment. I couldn't breathe. My chest was a vacuum. I saw the muzzle of the 88 flash. A brilliant, blinding orange-white flower of pure destruction bloomed 500 yards away. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical erasure of sound. For a fraction of a second, the world went silent, sucked into the void created by the shell's launch. Then the crack returned, 1,000 times louder than before, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the sky in two. It was the sound of the shell's sonic boom, and it was instantly followed by the impact. The shell struck the Lucky Penny not with a gong or a clang, but with an apocalyptic, deafening bang that felt like the fist of God himself had punched our tank. The M4 Sherman, all 30 tons of it, was physically shoved sideways in the mud by the sheer kinetic energy of the impact. The world inside the turret became a nightmare of white light, sound, and violence. I was thrown from my commander's seat, my head smashing hard against the steel radio set, my helmet saving my skull from being cracked open like an egg. A storm of metal fragments, spall, shrieked through the cabin, ripped from the inside of our own armor by the force of the non-penetrating hit. A chunk of white-hot steel the size of my thumb zipped past my face, so close I felt the heat of its passage, and embedded itself in the canvas tarp on the back wall, which instantly began to smolder. The air filled with a cloud of pulverized paint, dust, and a sharp metallic ozone smell. Every light in the turret shorted out, plunging us into a terrifying, vibrating darkness, lit only by the red glow of the smoldering canvas and the slivers of gray light from the periscope slits. We were dead. The thought was calm, final. This was it. This is what it felt like. The tank was filled with a high-pitched, continuous electronic squeal. The sound of my own nerves firing. My eardrums shattered. I couldn't hear. I couldn't see. I tasted blood and cordite. My head was ringing, a deep, resonating bell that drowned out all thought. Then, a voice, guttural and raw, cut through the fog. I'm hit. Ah, damn it all. It was Miller. My vision swam back into focus. In the dark, I saw his silhouette. He was slumped over his gun sight, his left arm clamped tight to his right shoulder. Miller, talk to me," I yelled, my own voice sounding thin and distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I scrambled back to my feet, my legs shaking. "Spall," he grunted, his voice tight with pain. "Got me in the shoulder. It's just blood. I'm okay. He was lying, but he was alive. "Peterson, Davies, sound off," I roared, my commander's voice returning. Alive, sir," Peterson stammered from the floor, where he was curled in a fetal position, sobbing. I can't hear, sir. Good enough." I grabbed his collar and hauled him to his feet. "Get that shell, get it in the gun, now." Below me, Davies's voice was a low curse. "Engine's still running, Lieutenant, but I think he broke a track. We're not moving. We're a sitting duck, sir. We're a sitting duck." He was right. We were immobilized, dead in the water. The Tiger, the wounded, angry beast, was out there, and he was reloading. The German loaders were fast. 8 seconds, 10 at most. 10 seconds, until he sent another 88mm shell through the hole he'd just failed to make. The laughter of my crew, the memory flashed again. They laughed, and now we were going to die, all because I wouldn't back down. But the Tiger's shell hadn't penetrated. I saw it now. I scrambled back to my periscope, my eyes aching. The shell had struck the upper glacis, the thickest part of our sloped frontal armor. Davies's pivot, bless him, had been just enough. The shell had hit at such an extreme oblique angle that its hardened steel core had failed to bite into our armor. It had deflected, skittering off into the sky, leaving a massive 3-foot-long gouge in our steel plate, a raw, smoking scar that proved how close we had come to annihilation. We were alive. We were crippled, but we were alive. And the tiger was still reloading. This was it. Our one, final, desperate chance. The fear was gone, burned away by the impact, replaced by a cold, pure, adrenaline-fueled rage that was almost black in its intensity. He had his shot. He had failed. Now it was our turn. "Miller!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Can you shoot?" I saw him in the gloom. He was leaning heavily on his controls, his right arm hanging uselessly, but his left hand was on the traverse wheel, and his good eye was pressed white-knuckled to the sight. "I can't feel my hand, Lieutenant," he gasped, his teeth gritted. "But I still see him. He's just sitting there, reloading, arrogant bastard." He was a one-armed gunner in a crippled tank, aiming at a monster that had just nearly vaporized him, and he was the most beautiful man I had ever seen. "Peterson!" I turned to the loader. He was pale, shaking so hard he could barely stand, but he was holding the new AP shell, his eyes wide with a sort of hysterical, manic terror. "Give it to me." I ripped the heavy shell from his hands, shoving him aside. "Breach!" I yelled at Miller. He hit the lever with his good elbow, and the smoking breech block snapped open, ejecting the casing from our first, failed shot. It clattered to the floor, rolling in the dark. With a grunt, I lifted the 20-pound shell and slammed it home myself, the greasy feel of the breech a familiar, final comfort. I slapped the closing lever, and the breech sealed with a heavy, satisfying chunk. "Gun loaded!" I roared, taking Peterson's job. "Miller, you're shot." "My pleasure, Lieutenant," Miller breathed. His voice was no longer angry or sarcastic. It was serene. It was the voice of a man who had already died and had nothing left to lose. "He's not moving. He thinks we're dead. He's taking his sweet time." Through my own sight, I saw it. The tiger was motionless. They probably thought that hit had finished us. They were probably arguing about who got the kill ring. They were wrong. "Hit him in the wound, Miller," I whispered, my voice now a cold, tight wire. "Put it right in the same hole. Make it hurt." "On the way," Miller grunted. I saw the turret shudder as he made the tiny, final adjustment with his one good hand. "Target, locked, clear." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The world shrank again to that one single point of light. "Fire," I said. The lucky penny bucked again, a familiar, violent shove. The roar of our own gun was a comfort this time, a song of defiance. The cordite was thick, choking, but it smelled like victory. I watched the second tracer, our messenger of hate, fly across the 500 yards of no man's land. It didn't waver. It flew straight and true, a red-hot needle aimed at the one tiny flaw we had managed to create. It struck the tiger in the exact same spot on the turret ring. This time the effect was not a simple flash. It was a catastrophic, blinding detonation. A huge, brilliant blue-white arc like a welder's torch exploding erupted from the joint, followed by a gout of roiling, greasy black smoke. Our shell had pierced the weakened metal. It had punched through the bearing, through the thinner armor, and had found the ammunition. I saw a secondary explosion, a bright percussive thump, inside the tiger's turret. "Ammo! We hit the ammo!" I screamed, my voice breaking in a sob of sheer, unbelievable triumph. The tiger shuddered, a massive mortal wound. The long 88mm cannon, that instrument of our terror, suddenly went limp. Its breech must have been destroyed or its crew killed, because the gun's hydraulic pressure failed, and the massive barrel dipped, plunging its nose into the mud like a defeated animal bowing its head. A thick, oily column of black smoke began to pour from the damaged turret ring. And then, a second later, the commander's hatch on top of the turret was thrown open with a violent clang. An arm, clad in black, appeared. Then a head, and a man, his uniform smoldering, began to claw his way out. He was on fire. He was screaming, a sound I could hear even from this distance, a thin, terrible wail of agony. But it wasn't over. Even as the commander burned, a new threat emerged. The coaxial machine gun in the hull, the one we had forgotten, suddenly opened up. A stream of red tracers lashed out from the front plate, spraying wildly, pinging and sparking off our own armor. The driver or the radio operator was still alive, still fighting, firing blind in a desperate last-ditch act of defiance. The bullets were harmless, bouncing off our thick plate, but it was a terrifying reminder that the beast, though dying, still had claws. "He's still fighting," Peterson yelled, his panic returning. "Peterson! Load!" I roared, grabbing him and shaking him back to reality. "Get the shell! Get it in the gun! We finish this! Now!" he finally snapped. Adrenaline took over where courage had failed. He grabbed the third AP shell, his movements jerky but effective. He slammed it into the breech. "Loaded!" he screamed, his voice cracking. I looked at Miller. He was slumped, his good eye still at the sight, his face a mask of pale, sweaty concentration. "Miller, one more. For the lucky penny, put it right in his goddamned gut. The machine gun tracers were still zipping past us, but I didn't care. I was beyond fear. We were the predator now. I see him, Miller whispered. He wasn't aiming for the turret, he was aiming for the center mass, the front plate where the MG was firing. This is the one. He squeezed the trigger. The third shot left the barrel, the one that would change everything. There was no finesse to this last shot. No calculation of weak points, no aiming for seams. It was a pure, blunt force expression of hatred. Miller, with his one good arm and a belly full of rage, had aimed for the center of the hull, and his aim was true. Our third shell, the final AP round we had in the ready rack, crossed the distance in a flat, vicious trajectory. It struck the Tiger's front plate, the part of the tank that was supposed to be invulnerable, the part that had deflected the 88's own shell from our hull. But the Tiger, in its arrogance, had not sloped its armor nearly as well as we had. Our shell hit the 100mm thick plate almost perfectly flat. It did not penetrate. It was never going to, but it didn't have to. The sheer, unmitigated kinetic violence of the impact, striking a piece of hardened steel that had already been massively stressed by our previous hits and the torque of its own damaged turret, did something we could never have planned. It broke it. A massive, jagged crack, like a bolt of black lightning, split the Tiger's frontal glacis from the machine gun port up to the driver's viewport. The machine gun tracers, which had been lashing out at us, stopped, not slowed down. They stopped, as if a switch had been thrown, cut off in midstream. The man firing it was either dead, knocked unconscious, or too busy trying to escape the inferno that his tank was about to become. And then, the finale. The secondary explosion we had caused with our second shot, the one that had lit the turret, had been simmering, a fire building in the stored ammunition. Now, with the hull cracked and the tank's structural integrity shattered, the fire found fresh oxygen. Or perhaps our third shot had, by sheer dumb luck, hit a different lower ammo rack. The result was the same. The Tiger detonated. It was not like the movies. It was not a single, clean whoomp of fire. It was a series of rapid, catastrophic internal explosions. First, a violent boom from deep within its belly. A sound so low and powerful I felt it in my bones. A concussive force that made our own crippled Sherman ring like a bell. A fraction of a second later, the 12-ton turret, which had been the source of all our terror, was lifted bodily from its ring. It rose a full 5 feet in the air, spinning slowly like a macabre toy before it crashed down onto the tank's chassis, half on, half off, at a drunken, impossible angle. From the gaping, fiery hole where the turret had been, a pillar of roiling orange and black flame erupted, climbing 100 feet into the bruised evening sky, a funeral pyre visible for miles. The hull itself seemed to split at the seams, bright orange light pouring from the new crack in the front plate, from the driver's hatch, from the escape hatch, from every conceivable vent and viewport. The fire was so intense, so immediate, that it consumed the screams before they could even begin. The Tiger, the invincible predator, the steel beast of legend, was now nothing more than a giant burning metal box, a hastily built furnace for the 5 men trapped inside. The air was filled with the shriek of tortured, warping steel, and the roar of a fire so hot it began to melt the very mud around it. And then, silence. The roar of the fire was a constant, but the sounds of battle, the cannon shots, the machine guns, the rattling, the impacts, the screaming, were gone, all gone. There was only the sound of the flames and the high-pitched, steady ee of the tinnitus in my ears. I let my binoculars fall, their strap catching on my neck. I leaned my forehead against the cold, damp steel of the periscope housing, the metal vibrating slightly from our own idling wounded engine. I was shaking. My entire body was convulsing in a violent, uncontrollable tremor, the aftershock of an adrenaline dose so massive it had nearly stopped my heart. I took a breath, my first real breath in what felt like a lifetime. It was a ragged, sobbing gasp that tasted of cordite, blood, and ozone. It was the most painful, most beautiful breath I had ever taken. We were alive. We were crippled. We were wounded. We were trapped in a steel box in the middle of a muddy field, but we were alive. In the dim red-lit gloom of the turret, I looked at my crew. Peterson was on the floor, his back against the ammunition rack, his face buried in his knees. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just rocking, a low, rhythmic, animal motion. He was gone, his mind shattered by the terror, but he was alive. Below I could hear Davies, his head resting on his steering levers, his breathing harsh and ragged. He wasn't saying anything, just breathing. He was alive. Then I looked at Miller. He had slumped completely over his gun sight, his good arm cradling his bad. His face was a waxy pale gray, slick with a mixture of sweat and grime. He was breathing in short, painful gasps. He slowly, so very slowly, lifted his head. His eyes found mine in the dark. The scorn was gone. The anger was gone. The pragmatic fear was gone. All that was left was a deep, hollow, bottomless exhaustion and something else, a profound, terrible, and silent understanding. He had been there. He had seen it. He had pulled the triggers. I had been the fool who said it was possible, but he had been the one to make it so. He held my gaze for a long, silent moment. His cracked, bloody lips pulled back from his tobacco-stained teeth, not in a laugh, not even in a smile, but in a grimace that was the most profound expression of victory I had ever witnessed. He gave a single, pained, jerky nod. It was a gesture of concession, a salute, an absolution. They had laughed when I said I could take it down. They weren't laughing now. No one was. I looked back out the periscope at the burning monument to our desperation. The shots had changed everything. I was no longer the green lieutenant. Miller was no longer the grizzled veteran. Peterson was no longer the fresh-faced kid. We were just survivors. We were the men who had killed a tiger. I lifted the radio microphone to my lips, my hand shaking so badly I could barely press the transmit button. My voice was a dry, cracked, unrecognizable croak. Lucky Penny. To column. Target destroyed. I say again, Tiger is down. We are immobile. We require assistance. Over.